Then over on the right or starboard side, just coming up, is the Horning Village Marina. And as we go by, you'll see there are a number of houseboats in there. Now, quite a few people do live on the right-hand side of the river. The only drawback, if you do live over there, well, there's only one way to get there, and that is by boat. So first thing in the morning, before they start their day, the folks that live on the right there have to row themselves across the river to the Horning side. Of course, later on in the day, no matter what the weather, they have to row themselves back again. So if you prefer to live by the water in a little bit more luxury, maybe one of these rather nice houses on the Horning side would be more to your liking. They do occasionally come up for sale, and a nice 4-bedroom detached house by the edge of the water here, with a place to keep the boat, would typically cost somewhere between £600,000 and £700,000. So there's rather nice cream one coming up on the left here, the little house it's called. That was up for sale a couple of summers ago for over £1 million. Here's one of our local Ports Authority Rangers coming along in his sleek launch in the opposite direction. There's 5 of these Ranger boats which cruise around the Broads looking after people. And coming up on the left-hand side in a moment, we're coming up to a Southgate's boatyard, one of our local boatyards. These days they repair and maintain boats in that big shed, but during the Second World War that shed was used for building motor torpedo boats. And the people of Horning, the craftsmen here, were skilled at building wooden boats. Over on the right-hand side, well, quite a number of these boats moored up here are used as people's homes. So instead of having a houseboat, they actually live in the real boat. Some of the people living here have gone to a lot of trouble to build nice gardens and moorings where they keep their boats. As we go through the village, you'll see that a number of the properties have advertising boards by the waterside, and that's because many of these riverside properties are available to rent out. So there's one coming up here called Tealby, the chap's fishing there and the statue of the horses. Now that's one of the poshest of the rental places in the village, and if you want to hire that one out in the height of summer, it'll cost you around £2,500 a week. But it does sleep up to 8 people. Coming up next on our left-hand side, one of my favourite riverside properties, this little thatched cottage. As we go by, you'll see it's got its own thatched boat shed alongside it. And behind it all is a lagoon, which during the summer is covered in lilies. To get to the cottage, you have to cross the lagoon. So, either by boat or there is a small footbridge. But either way, no way to get your car there. We do have a lot of thatched properties in this area. When you look at one of our thatched roofs, the majority of the roof is made of Norfolk thatching reed, except for the decorative bits, sometimes underneath the windows and the roof or right on top of the ridge of the roof. Those decorative parts are made of sedge grass. But both plants are grown locally in the marshes, and we will be passing some of the reed beds a bit later on. You can see where it all grows. this next bend in the river, you'll be able to see some of our older thatched properties, which are known as the Georgian lodges. Many of these are over 100 years old, and mostly were built as weekend cottages and summer holiday homes. This very first one we come to is one of the prettiest. It was completely renovated 15 years ago, including a brand new thatched roof. But after the owners had finished their restoration works, they built a new dike to the rear, at the end of which they built a magnificent, brand new thatched boat shed, which must have impressed the neighbours no end, as a couple of years later, the neighbours built an even bigger boat shed next door. Now, many of these old places have wooden posts as foundations. The thing is, in this area, the ground is so very soft and boggy that you can't build a normal house. So what they have to do instead is drive piles into the marsh, and in the olden days they used to use wooden posts. The problem with the wooden posts, of course, is in the damp earth they eventually start to rot away. So some of these older houses have either sunk a little, or sometimes gone a bit lopsided. If you're thinking of buying a new one, it's not so much of a problem these days. They have steel and concrete piles these days, many of which have been known to go down 80 feet or more before they're solid enough to hold the house. Coming up on our left-hand side in a moment is probably our most unusual holiday home. Just coming into sight from behind that group of trees is an old Norfolk windmill. It was built there just over 200 years ago, but for the first 100 years that it stood there, it was in use as a working wind pump. In the 1930s, when it was no longer required for pumping water, it was converted to make a 3-bedroom cottage. Now, it's become quite famous over the years, so you'll find it on most of the picture postcards these days. But it was up for sale a few years ago, and you could have bought it for £295,000. Though if that does seem a bit much, well, you can usually get a postcard for about 30p. Up ahead of us now, we are approaching the ferry crossing point. There has been a ferry across the river here for over 1,000 years, joining the wood basket stayed on our right-hand side to the hauling side where the ferry is. Looks like the ferry boat is usually kept underneath this willow tree on the left, and I can see it's there at the moment, so presumably that means Dave, the ferryman, is not running any boats today. Now, the ferry in itself has had a long and varied history. The building which you see there now, obviously fairly modern. That's because the previous one burnt down in 1965 when its thatched roof caught fire. The one before that was bombed by the Luftwaffe in 1941. But the history of that pub goes way back to a group of Benedictine monks who first started selling their homemade mead there over 500 years ago. And the geese down on the bank on the right there, those are grey-lag geese. Now, the wood basket stayed here but the path is often flooded. We'll have a look as we go by, see if it still is. Well, it looks pretty flooded as we go by, yeah. Anyway, the Wood Bastard Stave is the starting point of the nature trail. Along the right-hand bank from here, you'll see little glimpses of a wooden walkway. That's the nature trail which leads to Cockshoot Broad Nature Reserve. We will be passing that in a few minutes' time. Over to our left-hand side just here, you can see the Horning Ferry Marina. As you can see, it's absolutely packed with boats. Most of the boats in there are privately owned. Anybody can keep a boat in there, but you do have to pay a mooring fee, which is typically about £2,000 per year for each boat. Some of the boats which you see in there are ocean-going boats. There's only a handful of those, but those which go to sea have radars, aerials and things like that on top of the boat. And if you do want to go out to sea from here, we are headed in the right direction at the moment, although it is another 24 miles by water down to the coast of Great Yarmouth. It takes around about 4 hours by boat to get. There's a heron there standing on the bank, pressed the cottage on the left-hand side. Herons do stand very, very still. That is a real live heron, although you might think it's a statue by the fact they stand so still. The very last house in the village, coming up on our left-hand side here, that was also an old Georgian lodge. But the original one fell down 15 years ago now, and it's since been replaced with a brand new building exactly the same size and shape as the original. It was quite a surprise when the first one fell down. There was no warning. The old place was in use as a holiday home at the time. There was a young couple staying there right in the middle of the summer. Everything seemed to be going really well for them, until the Wednesday morning when we came by to see the old house leaning over about 15 degrees to one side. It seems that the wooden post which held it up had given way quite suddenly, overnight, all down the one side of the house.